Welcome to Happy Homes and Gardens. I'm your host. My name is Daphne Royse. I am a rose broker, architecture, and interior designer. Aedicule is the only shop on the West Coast that makes custom handmade frames for the private art collectors, museums, and designers. Peter Werkhoven was trained in Amsterdam and mastered gilding and antique restorations for a decade before opening his boutique in San Francisco. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Good, very well. Please tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, my name is Peter Werkhoven. I'm originally from Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and I'm a picture framer. A picture framer in the old sense, where we do all the carving and the gilding in our studio like they used to do for centuries.
Can you tell us where the name Aedicule means and how did you decide to name your store this?
Well, it's a Latin term, and in Latin it means little house. It's an architectural term, really. In classical architecture, it refers to a niche covered by a pediment, supported by a pair of columns, and typically framing a statue. This was also done in cathedrals in ancient times surrounding paintings, and thus the first picture frame. And since the store had to have a name, and I didn't want to call it Peter's Workshop, we came up with this.
Great. Aedicule is the name of a store, and that's the house frame. When originally the picture frames originated, what kind of materials do you use?
Well, we basically started with a piece of lumber. So it's all wood that we do. Now, throughout the century, around 1840, people started to come up during the industrial, a hard word for me being Dutch, industrialization came up. People started to work with a composition material. So just to spare a lot of time and to make it more commercial. So if there are frames that we need to make that were done from that period, we'd like to do that in a composition material as well. But I think what we do here, 80% is all hand carved. So carved out of wood.
What are the composition materials that you mentioned here?
Well, there are different materials around, but then it gets really technical. I think the first composition material I work with a lot still, that is a combination of chalk, rice paper, and rabbit skin glue. When you mix those, you can create a very hard, putty-like composition material. And that was really invented in the 18th century in France.
When they harden the materials, then you starting to carve like a lumber.
Well, actually, what we do with that material, and we call it PATE, P-A-T-E, is we first create a mold of and copy an antique frame. So we create a mold, a rubber silicone mold, and then once that's set in a day, then we use that PATE, that putty, and put that in that mold, and so we copy ornamentation on frames.
I see. Okay. And before 1940, was frame only made by wood or only made by hand?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Basically, after 1940s, we started to have a machine-made frame.
Well, actually, the 1840s, I would say. I'm sorry. Correct. At the industry, here we go again, hard word. Industrialization. It was taken over by machines for a big part.
1840.
Yes, correct.
Okay, all right. That's a long time ago, almost 200 years ago.
That's correct.
Almost.
That's correct.
How long will it take you to make one frame?
Well, that all depends about the complexity of that frame. If it's just a straight, modern, straightforward molding, then of course there are drying times in between. But then I can do that in a day if I go fast. But there are frames that are so complicated and that need so much carving that it can take months to complete it. And it depends how big it is. I once created a frame, I think that was about 8 foot by 12 feet. Yeah, that just takes longer. All about the complexity.
And how did you design the frame? Do you match with a painting? What is depends on the customer need?
No, I design it around the painting. I'm arrogant enough to first come in and just think about what is the best for this painting. Sometimes customers come in with pieces of fabric of their curtain or the color of their couch, and they want to match that to their couch. For me, it's all about, I'm a servant to the painting. So I want to enhance the painting as good as possible. So that is the direction that I come from. So I'm first going to show them what I want and what I like and how I see it. And then afterwards, they can come back to me and say, yeah, but I really like it this way and this way. And then, okay, sure. And, I'll adjust my intake a little bit. But in most of the cases, it turns out that I won't say they will listen to me, but of course, I've been doing this all my life, and I sleep it, and I drink it, and I eat it. So I think I do know what I'm talking about a little bit.
Can you share with us the steps of how you make a frame?
Well, again, it starts with a piece of lumber, just a piece of wood, and then that is being milled out at a planing mill into the shape, into the profile that I want it to be. That we need to create. From that, we cut it to the right size, and put those 4 sticks together, and then we have the rough molding. If it needs to be carved, we make raw sketches or quick sketches on top of the wood profile, and then the master carver goes wild at it, and he starts carving away and chipping away until we have the design that we really are after. After that, we want to seal the grain of the wood, and we do that with a couple of layers of gesso, Gesso, which is nothing more than a mixture of chalk, rabbit skin glue, and water. And that provides for a beautiful smooth surface over the wood, so that seals all the grain. After that, it gets a couple of layers of chalk, mixed again with an hide glue and a rabbit skin glue, and that can be a red clay or a black clay or a yellow clay. What that does, it changes the color of the gold that will be applied later onto that layer of clay. Once that's been polished and applied, then it will be gilded, the surface, and that is a carat gold that can be anywhere between 8 carat and 24 carat. After that has been applied, some parts most of the time will be burnished with an agate stone. This creates for a very shiny gold tone. It almost looks like it's a solid piece of gold on that frame consists of. Now you can stop there. Then it'll look like King Tut's mask, and some people like that around their painting or for their mirror. But we specialize in copying antique frames, so we need to make it look like, if it's a 17th century frame, I need to make it look old, and I need to make it look like a 17-year-old frame. So what we do is we take a lot of gold off again of that frame. We remove that, and then those colors of clay that are underneath the gold will appear. And that gives some character to the frame. And then after that, the final part is there will be about 15, 20 different patinas applied upon the gold. We will fake a crackle in the gesso. We will make wormholes. We damage it, and we give it patinas. And at that stage, hopefully, it looks like a real antique frame, and people cannot distinguish the real one from the fake one. That is our game that we play.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It's a lot of labor. Yes, it's a lot of labor.
Okay, I have many questions about what you just told me, the steps to build a frame.
I bet you do.
For example, the natural wood has so many different textures and grains. So what kind of wood that you normally use, like walnut or pine or redwood?
I'd like to use basswood the most because the grain is it's a softwood or poplar, which is a little harder. But the grain is more sealed already. If we use an oak, where the grain is really open, it soaks up the gesso too much for my liking, and it's really tough to carve in oak. We do it, but then we don't apply gesso. Then most of the time we give it just a natural color, and we stain it.
How about the gilding?
Well, again, it goes from carat. So it starts with 8 carat. Then we go to 12 carat white gold. Then there's a 13.5 carat. There is a 16 carat, which is a lemon gold. So what it basically all the way up to 24 carat. What that basically means is we start off with silver. Then we have white gold, and the 12 karat white gold all the way up to 24. What happens is the gold beaters just add more pure gold to the white gold. So there'll be more and more real gold and less silver added to the gold leaf until you have 24 karat. So you have all kinds of different colorations between 12 and 24 karat. And that is all about what kind of a color effect you want to create. In France, for instance, most of the time throughout the centuries, they use 23.5 carat until up to 24 carat, where the frame makers here in the US use 22 carat overall. It just gives a different coloration. The 22 karat is a little bit more green, where the 24 karat is just pure solid gold.
Does that require special scales for different type of karat gold?
No, the gilding of the 12 karat is a little bit easier because it's thicker. The 24 karat is just thinner. It's a thinner leaf. And it's just a matter of doing it, and that's the only way to learn it. Now, I've always said that I can turn anybody into a master gilder in a few weeks, and I still stand behind that. The gilding itself, how exciting it might sound, and how difficult it might sound to do, it's really a repetitive pattern, laying down the gold leaf onto a frame. It's really all about the antiquing and the patinas and all the labor around it.
For those store-bought custom frames, when they have the gold or silver frames, are they real karat gold?
They use an imitation gold. They use copper or a silver leaf in the best case scenario. The frames that you will find in 99% of the stores or picture framing stores are pre-manufactured moldings. They're done in the factory. Most of the time they come in 8 feet sticks. So if the picture framing store has a corner sample that you want to make a frame out of, what they do is they call the factory, they order a stick, and that stick arrives in their store. They only have to cut it and glue it to the right size of their painting, and they're done. So it's really not, if you go really to the core, it's really not picture framing what they're doing. It's really just fitting those 4 pieces around a piece of art, but there's no handcraft in that. Well, to the extent of what we do. 90% of the work I do, we apply real gold. That is because it looks just much more beautiful than a copper leaf, for instance. Not only that, really, it's much harder to work with a copper leaf and to tone that really well than it is to gold leaf. So if the customer wants to spend a little less money and says, well, why don't we do it in imitation in a copper leaf? requires actually more labor for me. So it's actually will make it more expensive. So there's no use for me to use copper leaf to save the client some money, because I will have to spend more hours on it. So you might as well use gold leaf, and it's much prettier.
So what kind of artwork would you recommend people to get a custom frame?
Well, that all depends on their budget. I've had birth announcement cards that I had to frame in very expensive frames, and we've had Picassos, and we've had it all. It really depends on the person's budget, but of course, if you're gonna frame a poster that you bought at IKEA, I would recommend to do that somewhere else. I'm more than happy to do it, of course. And if that's really important to them, of course, no, we'll frame it, of course.
What is a museum quality frame?
What is a museum quality frame? I think that is a frame that would not misfit in a museum. So we have never seen, or hardly ever seen, a pre-manufactured molding around a painting in a museum. What we see in the museums are either antique frames or really well-made reproduction frames to surround a painting.
Do you do matting, and how do you pick up the right glass for the artwork?
Well, we do matting, of course. We do matting. We create hand-colored mats like they used to do in the 17th century. And picking out the right type of glass, well, again, that's a budget thing, and how valuable the art itself is. I always like to use UV protective glass, of course, or plexiglass. And absolutely, when there's a valuable piece, we always use Museum Optium. It's clear, and it's also 99% UV resistant. But again, if it's a poster that you're framing, why not just put a piece of regular glass in front of it? It saves a lot of money.
Did you ever experience any challenges on your previous projects?
I experience challenges every day, like everybody else does. Yes. No, of course, we go by, I go by recipes. There are so many things that I've done so many times over the years that I know what will follow. But if you have to recreate something, sometimes people come in with a picture from first dips from a mirror that they saw, but it wasn't the right size for them, and they asked me, can you copy it? Yeah, sure, copy it. But then there's the challenge to read that picture that well enough that you understand what the profile really looks like, how the carving really is done. And those are challenges, and those are fun. That's what we live for the challenge, right? We want to grow, we want to learn. And with that, failure comes, and that's good too.
What are most picture frame sizes that you do, like average-wise?
The average size, I would say 30 by 40, but again, I get artwork, small, big, large, the mirrors, small, big, large, so that there's not really an average size.
Do you have a favorite frame style and color?
Well, being a carver and gilder and frame maker, you're most likely attracted to the more ornate frames because they're more complicated, there's more going on. But personally, because I work with that the whole day, I'm more mid-century in my taste. More straightforward lines, more simple, more basic, but that's just my personal taste. And again, it all depends on the art. If I would have had enough money to be able to buy a Picasso, I would have put a copy of a 17th century Spanish frame around it, because that's how we are used to see those pieces. I don't think I have a favorite color in frame. What I do like is around 1880. Until 1880, all the frames were just gilded, and they looked very shiny and gold, because the art dealers had the idea that if a painting is surrounded by a big ornate gilded frames, we can sell it better and for a higher price. Well, that was all very well, but around 1880, the painters started to thinking about, well, this richly gilded ornate frame doesn't fit with my artwork. It doesn't look good. So Degas, for instance, he started designing his own frames. And then what they did, they started to take the paintings out of those frames and they beat them up, and they threw acid over the frames that would eat the gold. And you would see all kinds of different colors appear that you would never have seen before, like that red clay that I was talking about earlier. And that created a harmony between the frame and the painting much better than a gilded shiny frame. So from that period on, artists started playing themselves again with frames. And if you're asking me what the favorite color is, that is really a favorite color of mine. That there's a lot of different tones happening in this per square inch versus just a gilded surface. You'll have to visualize it. Just visit the studio, and you're always welcome, and I'll show you.
Perfect. And can you elaborate how many styles out there for a friend?
Well, how many countries are there in the world?
A lot.
And how many centuries have we lived that we did this? No, I think the main styles are Louis XIII, 14, 15, 16. Then there's a typical Spanish style. There's a typical Italian style. There's a Dutch and a North Italian style. There's a German style. There's an American style. And that all changed throughout the centuries as well. Then there is the problem. It's an Italian carver that worked for Louis XV. Do we call that an Italian frame, or do we call that a Louis XV frame because it was done for Louis XV? So then they stole and they copied, and so there's all kinds of different styles going on. But I like to stay correct with the period. So we always first look at, okay, when was this painting painted? What period? What country? What was at that time usual to put around a painting like that? That's always how I start. But then you have to deal with taste, and that's just because it's a correct frame from the period doesn't look actually good around this painting. So those are all questions that we ask ourselves when we pick a frame for a painting.
That's very interesting you say that.
How so?
Because you decide where the painting is from, and you pick the frame in that era to frame around the artwork, and
Correct.
That looks good. My thinking is the artwork must have a different trends at different era in order to fit into certain frame at a certain era. Okay, for example, somebody bought you a 16th century painting, but it wouldn't probably fit well for 17th century frame or maybe 18th century frame. So what I'm saying is that's why 18th century frame might not fit in 16th century painting.
That's correct. However, when Picasso was painted his blue period, what was that, early 1900s? And he framed those pieces. He framed all those pieces with 17th century Spanish frames, and that's what we still see in the musea today. And he didn't frame them in the frames that were created around that time. So there is a playfulness going on, and sometimes it is better to have something more plain around a 16th century painting that was done then, even though the frames around in the 16th century weren't that elaborate to begin with. So
would that increase the value of the artwork if the artwork was from 16th century, you use a 16th century frame. Will that maintain the value higher for the artwork?
Yes, especially if it's the original frame. So if people decide to reframe an artwork, even if it was done only 50 years ago, but it has the original frame, don't throw that frame out. Keep it somewhere in the basement or wherever your storage room is. For whenever you want to sell that painting, you can sell it with the original frame. That is incredibly important. Yes, sure, pick a new frame out, whatever you like, but keep the original.
Can you elaborate the different styles between Spanish style and Louis XV style? I'm sure there must be huge differences.
There are huge differences, but that is really hard to explain without showing you the samples of these. Again, for that, everybody is welcome to come to the studio and the showroom. We'll have a glass of wine and I'll show you the whole history of picture framing. All right. So this is a typical Louis XV style frame. Now, I mentioned earlier that I really like mid-century frames because of their clear, clean lines. But I find this also a fantastic, beautifully ornate frame. There's so many things going on. There's so many different color tones going on in tiny little sections. I even like the backside of it. So we'd like to also give details to the backside that it looks actually old. Well, there is a fun story where years ago I went to an exhibit of Steve Wynn, the Las Vegas Mongol. He had an exhibition in the Bellagio of his private art collection, and I was wandering through it and I thought, wow, this is beautiful, this is great. And then all of a sudden it stopped me in my tracks. I saw a painting of a Rembrandt that was framed by us when I was still working in Amsterdam. And I was amazed, and I thought, wow, that is fun. You know, here's the frame that we had our hands on years ago. But right beside it, there was a painting hanging by Johannes Vermeer that he had just bought at auction. But it was framed in a Louis XV picture frame. Now, we're not used to see that, and that is not from the right style period. What we are used to seeing around the Vermeer is a Dutch ebony frame. So I was wondering, and I said to myself, you know what, you should write him a letter. So I wrote him a letter, Mr. Wynn. It was wonderful, the collection. I really enjoyed seeing it. I also enjoyed the frame around the Rembrandt that I made years ago. But that Vermeer that is hanging right beside there, that doesn't make any sense. It has a French frame around it where it should have had a Dutch frame. So I suggested it. I said, I'm going to make you a frame the way I think it should be done. If you like it, you buy it. If you don't, you don't. No hard feelings. And I did. And of course, he bought it. And that's how the relationship with Steve Wynn started.
Great story. Please tell us how people can contact you.
We're located in San Francisco. The address is 3225 Sacramento Street. We're between Presidio and Lyon. Our store hours are Tuesday through Saturday from 10 till 5 or by appointment. And again, everybody is more than welcome to come in anytime they want. No appointment needed. Our telephone number is 415-771-5837.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was a wonderful interview.
It was fun.
The details.
Thank you for having me.
I love all the details that you added to the interview and show us the Louis XV frame.
You are so welcome. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.